Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is set to be an amazing game in regards to every single one of us Breath of the Wild fans, being able to dig into some of the more obscure lore, and even in some cases showing us more grand lore revelations. Even through trailers we've been able to see some really cool lore revelations. In fact, the gameplay we were shown in the Nintendo Treehouse presentation presented us with the confirmation that Link was first born in Hateno Village, and while this was fairly easy to spot through a few different areas in the map, and the main hint being that Link is from the Hylian settlement and the abandoned house in the town has been abandoned for about 100 years, this was still amazing to actually hear from someone who's technically worked on a Zelda game that our own headcanon was in fact correct. And of course we're sure to see more of these sorts of revelations, but today we aren't going to go solely into the lore, and how that could be affected by how Age of Calamity is handled. I'd love to talk about that, but 7,000 other people on YouTube have done that, and are still doing that. I'd like to escape the crowd just a little, even though I'm technically doing the opposite by still talking about Age of Calamity anyway. So instead of all that lore stuff, let's just talk about something we can all speculate on. Let's talk about some potential playable characters in Age of Calamity. First of all, what makes a potential playable character? To me, it's a character that would have a suitable moveset in the game. As you can see on screen right now, the original Hyrule Warriors game was fast and outgoing with its attacks, so I think that a potential character is a character that I think could be perceived as fast in nature. Since this is Age of Calamity and not the first Hyrule Warriors game, every single character on this list is purely Breath of the Wild based. Characters also need to have a potential special move and stamina gauge move, and any other sort of unique moves. So yeah, there are actually quite a few things to consider. I think that there's a chance that we could see some of the characters seen in Breath of the Wild 100 years after the Calamity, because the Hyrule Warriors team doesn't really take itself too seriously outside of its story, especially if there does turn out to be an alternative to the adventure mode seen in the likes of the first Warriors game. With that said, let me finally get into the characters on my list. First of all is possibly a fan favourite when it comes to Breath of the Wild villains being playable in the next game. I've done a detailed physical description on them before, so I'll try and leave that out of this video. Of course I'm talking about the bokoblins. Their Breath of the Wild variant are possibly my favourite enemy in any Zelda game to date. Instead of a physical description of their appearance, let's talk about how these little dudes fight. When battling the hero of Wilds, they throw their arms around in a manic fashion, only attempting to hit the hero, but if they hit Link they can do a ton of damage to the player. Higher levels of bokoblins can even hit the player with such force that they can even knock the hero over. The point here is that this manic fighting style could be utilised in amazing fashion that complements gameplay. In fact, there was a similar style used in the first Hyrule Warriors game, and of course the user was Zant. Zant threw his arms around and brought his scimitars down on any foe unlucky enough to be under his vicious strikes. Instead of large downward thrusts seen with Zant, bokoblins could instead be used to do more horizontal damage, as they seem to like throwing their bokobats around to the side rather than vertically. This could do damage to enemies both in front and to the sides of the player, and these attacks would of course be attacks used by spamming the Y button on a Switch controller, and you can gain more combos assuming the same badge system is used as seen in the first game. In terms of the special attacks, what do I think the bokoblins could do? Just in case some of you haven't played the first game, here's a clip right now of Toon Link spinning in Hyrule Warriors. I think that the bokoblin special move could function in a much similar fashion. As I've already said, the bokoblins don't seem to know what they're doing most of the time, and one of their key moves to players in game was probably the little dances that they do when the bokoblins are interacting with other friends of the same species. So a special move could look like the bokoblin doing a little jig before aimlessly spinning around, hurling masses of enemies around the playing course. And for that last main attack that we could see in the next game for this character, I would expect to see the usual bokoblin using an unupgraded bokobat, so that when they're damaging a boss and eventually get that gauge down to 0, the bokoblin could actually pull out a different weapon off the floor, perhaps even a spiked bokobat. They could slap around the boss with it, and could do a final bit of damage as the bat breaks, leaving him with his old bokobat, but this is all speculation. I can just hope that we could see the bokoblins utilised as a playable character somewhere in game. Even the variants of the enemy could be used as costumes in game. Next up is one that I've talked about on the channel already, and out of all the characters on this list, I will possibly bet the most on this one, and that's probably just down to personal preference. But just hear me out. MaskedNintendoBandit. He's the boss in the Champions Ballad DLC pack, and he's easily the most badass boss out of all of the lot in Breath of the Wild. He's basically the equivalent of a Sheikah god, and he possesses the power of a god and utilises it masterfully in game. So before I vent on about who this character is and some backstory or whatever, I'd like to talk more about his moveset. And as I'm sure you know, this moveset could be both diverse and incredible to use. We've seen that the Sheikah already have one representative in the form of Impa in Age of Calamity, and MaskedNintendoBandit could function similarly to how Impa runs. He turns into a few different clones of himself to try and trick his enemies, and brings out a weapon, in this case namely the Guardian Sword. Running around in this manner doesn't seem far-fetched for the reasons I've already stated. So how do I think that the normal attacks could function? When spamming the Y button, I think that the monk could hit foes directionally with his Guardian Sword, just as a usual swordsman. At the end of any long run of spamming and pressing X for a combo, I think that he could dive down and kill a few enemies with a sort of ground pound attack. Special attacks next. These could be done with one simple method. In Breath of the Wild, we see that the monk can in fact use the blue lasers, only usable by guardians up until that point. So why not make him able to use a laser to kill a line of enemies in front of you? This could easily kill 50 to 60 foes and would be extremely satisfying to utilize. The last thing to consider will possibly be the boss attack once again. Sorry if I'm not being clear on which attacks I'm talking about, as I don't know the definitive name for each attack, but the attack that is used when fighting bosses to lower their health substantially could be the utilization of the monk's ability to grow into supersize and sit on the enemy. This could clearly crush all foes nearby and the center target, though I really wouldn't want to be the one under there. My next pick for another playable character would be another enemy. Try and take a guess. They walk around, wear red, and all reside in one little cabin seen in Gerudo Desert. You're either thinking of the Blade Masters, Master Koga, or the Foot Soldiers right now. And of course, I'm going to pick the most fragile of these characters. I would love to see the Foot Soldiers in Age of Calamity. I didn't realise how amazing these villains would be until recently. In a lot of ways, the villains themselves are similar to that of Monk Mazcotia. When running, Foot Soldiers could just run in a quick fashion. No clones this time, but just as quickly as the monk can run nonetheless. Normal attacks could be made in a couple of different fashions. The first of which would be to pretty much copy and paste Linkle's normal moves from the first Hyrule Warriors game in the Zelda world. There's some gameplay on right now of her doing her normal moves. Just shooting bows to kill enemies from a ranged distance would be both smart and advantageous for the player, and would give them an incentive to actually use the Yiga Foot Soldiers. The second way that we could handle normal attacks is by using their bow in a more up close and personal fashion. However, I do think that we both know which attacking style I think the team will utilise. The Foot Soldier special attacks could all come down to opening up a circle of enemies to the Foot Soldier, teleporting to 3 different locations, and shooting through all the enemies seen in that circle of enemy. The last and possibly coolest attack that I have linked down for the Foot Soldiers comes in the form of the Boss Special. When lowering that gauge to 0, the Foot Soldier could teleport into the air, arm their duplex bow with bomb arrows, and could shoot the boss with devastating waves of bomb arrows from all sides. With that being said, do you have any other cooler ideas for cool attacks for the Yiga Foot Soldier? My last but not least pick is a character whose theme I think all of us Breath of the Wild fans have probably at least hummed before, and also probably played on repeat for multiple days. I was having a few bad days. It's a character from post-Calamity Hyrule, and it's a Rito. Of course I'm talking about Cass. Cass being a fighter may be weird to some people who haven't played the first Warrior game before, and I get that, considering Cass has never fought in front of the hero wilds and consequentially the player themselves. So why do I think that he's a solid pick? He's one of the most memorable characters in Breath of the Wild by a large margin. He's cool, witty, and has that amazing music to back all of that personality. So without further ado, how could his moveset work? We've seen someone similar to Cass in the first Hyrule Warriors game in the form of Sheik. They used a musical instrument to damage and kill enemies, so how could Cass do a similar thing? Well, when he runs, it would be as easy as letting him fly low to the ground, as that would definitely suffice, similar to Ruto in the first game. Cass's normal attacks could be strokes or notes played in his accordion to slay groups of enemies. Cass could look very casual while doing this, as he has a history of playing his instruments. If he's in game, this seems likely to me. His special attack could have him fly over hordes of enemies and smacking them with his wings. Many of his attacks could be casual bird moves, but I think that Cass does deserve more than that. However, when talking about his boss special attacks, I think that he could fly into the air, as many have on this list, and play a few notes out of the Cass's theme, a song adored by many, and that could harm the enemy in some capacity, just as the Goddess Harp did in the first game. Cass could look suave the entire time while the player utilises his abilities. Now, let's start the conversation. Who do you want to be playable in Age of Calamity? And tell me some cool moveset options for the character that you pick, as it was great fun to pick some myself, and I always want to get your guys' opinions. I won't bore you like usual, as I've already taken way too much of your time today, but please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed, as it helps me out so much, and check out my other stuff in the description. My Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch are all down there. Would you like to join these beautiful people on screen right now? If you do, then please donate to my Patreon if you can and want to, and have the money to do so. Any amount of money is greatly appreciated. The link's in the description with everything else. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video just as much as I enjoyed making it. Please stay safe with everything going on, and I'll see you all next week for more Zelda content.